Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to come along. I thought I should probably start with a story, and it goes back to the heart of what we do. And I won't say exactly who the company was, because you have to protect the guilty, or whatever the correct terminology is. But this guy, who's a very senior CEO, went public in a newspaper and said that he wanted to take his brand into the top 10 on Interbrand's brand ranking. We produce this ranking every year, which lists brands by their value. We'll come back to that later on. And he said he wanted to be in the top 10. So I saw this. Somebody put it in front of me and said, were you aware that they wanted to do it? And I thought I'd better give him a call. So I called up his office, and of course he wasn't there, and spoke to his PA and said, you know, you should be aware, or he should be aware, of what he's just committed himself to. Do you realise how big the gap is between the value that he has now and the value that he wants to have? And does he know how he's going to get there? So anyway, she said, I'll put it in front of him. 24 hours later, I get a call straight from him. I think we should probably meet. So we met, and he came to see me in my office in London, and we sat down and he talked about it. And I said, so what is it that you're trying to achieve? And he said, we want to be the most loved and admired brand in the world. And I said, right. I said, I'm sure there's lots of other companies that would say the same thing, which is perhaps something to talk about later, but why do you want to be loved and admired? And he said, well, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? And I said, well, yeah, it's great to be loved and admired. I can think of lots of brands that I love and lots of brands that I admire. So I said to him, wouldn't you rather just be the most frequently purchased in your sector? And he thought very carefully about that. And he said, well, doesn't love and admiration turn into purchase? And I said, not always. Now, the point about this really goes to the very heart of the way that we look at brands at Interbrand. About 30 years ago, we invented a methodology called brand valuation. And it was originally invented around a merger and acquisition. It was a very large company which was under threat of a hostile takeover. And we approached them and said, we actually think that the bid that's being put in for your company is too low. And the reason that the bid is too low is because they've underestimated the true value of your brands. For some of you who may be financially minded, you'll know that many companies calculate what's called goodwill. And this is calculated at a point of sale, and it's really a way to cover up the difference between the fixed assets of a business and the overall value that's placed on it by the acquisitor. So anyway, we went back and said, we think you're wrong, we think you're worth more, created a methodology around it, and that's become the basis of what is now brand valuation, and has just recently been turned into an international standard. Now, there are three elements within this thing that we look at. The first of all is down to the financial performance of the company, and we use a standard measure in terms of finance called EVA, which is about economic value add. It's the degree to which your operations are adding value. So it's a simple way of thinking about it is earnings. And what we then try and do is determine the proportion of your earnings which are due to your brand. Pretty simple stuff, really. And we use two measures for that. The first is something called role of brand. And it's a simple measure of choice. So if last time you thought about buying a car, the last time you thought about buying a soda, the last time you thought about buying anything which happened to have a brand on it, what we do is calculate the percentage of that decision which comes down to your brand. So this was the big point to our friend in the beginning of the story who said, I just want to be loved and admired. I said, you really should be wanting to be chosen. That's what matters. People actually buying you. If you understand how your brand works in that transaction, and how you might be able to make it work harder for you, and indeed what your competitors might be doing, it gives you a very quick perspective as what is possible within your marketplace. So, if I can tell you, and I can, we've looked at virtually every sector you can think of in virtually every market, and I can tell you that if you're buying gas for your car, probably only about 10% of that decision has anything to do with the brand. It's probably about 5 or 6 different companies that you'll happily drive into their gas stations and fill your car up. Yeah? Kind of makes sense to everyone. However, if you're buying perfume or luxury goods, the chances are that somewhere between 80 and 90% of that decision is to do with the brand. You might tell yourself it's because it smells nice or because it's really good quality leather, but the truth is it's really about the brand, because you're more interested in what it might say about you or how it makes you feel about yourself than necessarily the fact that it's a particularly good value equation purely in terms of price. So we put a figure on that. Then the next thing we do is try and work out how far into the future you might actually be able to generate that. And that's called brand strength. It's a competitive measure. The other way of looking at it is that it's a measure of loyalty. How far into the future are you likely to continue buying that brand? The combination of those three things effectively enables you to create an asset value. That's all it is. It's in the same way that you might go and do a valuation on a factory or a piece of machinery or whatever it might be, a fixed asset. We use similar techniques to do a valuation on an intangible asset. Might sound very complicated if we just work out what a brand does. But when you consider that Coca-Cola, which is the number one on our brand league table that we produce every year, and in fact we released just yesterday, is $72 billion worth of brand value. Now that valuation obviously takes into account forward value as well as now. But when you compare it to the market capitalization of Coca-Cola, which is around about 100 billion, let's say, to round it out nice and easily, 72% of the value of that company, therefore, could be expressed as their brand. When you then put that into context of their fixed assets, so all of Coca-Cola's plant, machinery, everything else that they own, right down to the chairman's desk, only adds up to about $4.5–5 billion. So on that basis, their brand is worth 12 times as much as all of their plant, machinery and everything else, including the chairman's desk. And yet they spend more money understanding actually Coca-Cola is a bad example with this, because actually they do spend quite a lot of money understanding their brand, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But most companies don't. They spend far more money revaluing their machinery and plants and buildings and everything else than they do understanding how their brand works. And yet their brand is critically important in most instances in terms of purchase. Now, we produce this league table every year, as I mentioned, and Coca-Cola are number one, and they are a fantastic case study in how to market products and how to use brand. There's no doubt about it. Runs right the way through the company, from products and services, communications, which is the thing that a lot of people think that branding is all about. It isn't. We'll come back to that in a minute. Through to culture, through to environments. It permeates everything that they do. It's the way they do business. Consequently, their brand is extremely valuable, and the really clever thing that they manage to do is that they don't really innovate that much in terms of their product. They tried it once and it was a complete disaster. I'm sure you remember it was called New Coca-Cola or New Coke or whatever it was, and they very quickly had to change it. So their product has remained exactly the same, famously so. And they innovate around the edges in terms of their packaging, in terms of their communications and the way that they try and engage people. But the really clever thing about what Coke does is that they manage to continually remain fresh in consumers' minds, relevant in consumers' minds. They're very, very well differentiated upon their competition. And importantly, on our measures, they are chosen. You know, and everyone's heard the classic stories about when you change the brand names on the front, people will always choose Coca-Cola. And they also remain chosen in time. So they have this incredibly strong brand, which means that for those of you who drink soda, chances are you probably do buy Coke at some point, and you're probably going to continue to do that well into the future. So on that basis, they have a very strong, very valuable brand because it generates loads of money. So what can you do with all of that, says the guy sitting on the other side of the table who is still thinking that it's all about admiration and desire. And I said, well, if you understand how your brand actually works for your company, how it actually helps you sell and how it helps people buy, well, once you understand how that operates, you can get smarter about how you deploy your resources, how you spend money, people, time, all those kinds of things. And more importantly, you can work out where you really need to put your efforts in terms of innovation, in terms of creativity, in terms of all the other things that you do in order to make brands come to life in the face of consumers. Oh, he said. And off he went and carried on wanting to be the most admired and most desired brand. And the net result is that he no longer has the job. and the company concerned is really not doing very well, thank you very much, and is being eaten alive by people like Apple, who are past masters in building brands and really do understand about the fact that it's about people, it's about culture, it's about communications, it's about environments. Look how they transformed retail. Look how well their products and services fit together. The culture of those guys in the Genius Bar, I mean, it's almost scary. Where do they get them from? But they are perfect walking, talking ambassadors for the brand. So you don't just get the sense that it's all to do with a logo. It's actually to do with that company. It's to the way they do business. If you understand how your brand works, how it generates value for you, the chances are you can spend money, time, effort, and resources, of which everybody is limited in that. Nobody has endless resources, in order to make it all better. Make your retail better, make your product and service better, make your people more engaged in what you're about, make them better able to deal with their suppliers, buyers, and everybody else they're working with, make your communications more relevant, make them more targeted to the people that you really want to talk to, and make sure that you create experiences that truly do sum up what you're about. That's what branding is about, and that's how you build value. And as I said, you know, the sad thing is that some people just don't get it. Now, the other thing that always amazes me is the number of people you speak to who say that the brand is something that lives in the marketing department. Or, yeah, we do have a brand, but we don't really know how it works. Now, one of the big challenges that we see for businesses coming forward, and I'm sure none of you will relate to this whatsoever, because nobody ever nods when I talk about this, is that most companies are actually fractured inside. So they have departmental structures. Sometimes we talk about silos within organizations. And one of the things that businesses need to do, you talk to most CEOs and their biggest single problem is getting their own organization to work together, to have shared goals, to have a very distinctive view on where they're trying to take the business, to have a clear view of who their customer is, to have a sense of how their products and service should fit together with their environment, should fit together with customer service, etc., etc. And again, a clear understanding of what your brand is about, how it works for your business can create a consistent language that everyone can use and can actually put you in a position where everybody starts working together, which is the biggest challenge many CEOs face. So I think at Interbrand, we would argue that brand value is an important measure. It can help you really understand why people buy you, why they choose you, why they keep coming back. And beyond that, we believe that well-branded businesses end up being successful. They stand out. They stand for something. People want to go and work for them as employees, and people want to continue buying them as consumers. Thank you very much. I believe maybe some questions might be out there. Hi.
I just have a question regarding the brands, the strong brands, as you said, like Coca-Cola, it has 72%, I believe you said, as a branded value.
Yeah.
How would a strong brand like that fight against the external factors in the industry, like the increasing consumption of healthy drinks, water, sports drinks, etc.?
Every market obviously has competition. If you go back to things like Porter's 5 Forces, you know, the threat of substitutes was one of the things that he identified as a fundamental thing that businesses needed to be worried about. If you take a look at the entire Coca-Cola portfolio, they have waters, they have, I think they're the biggest juice manufacturer and seller in the world, as well as soft drinks. However, you know, what they recognize, I think, and the art of managing a portfolio of brands or products is about understanding how they fit into people's lives. So they have an understanding about how soda fits. I mean, I think the last thing that the guys at Coca-Cola would want would be for you to never drink anything else but Coca-Cola. I mean, they recognize that people drink different things. Their job is to make sure that they're there with the product that you want at the right time. Sometimes that'll be a soda, sometimes it's tea, sometimes it's water, that's the art of managing a portfolio of brands within a company. And they do a very good job of doing that. And then you recognize that you need to maximize the effect of each of those brands within the portfolio. And again, understanding how they generate value for your organization as a whole is a very powerful piece of knowledge.
So how would you say a brand can meet the needs of global audiences and at the same time meet the needs of local consumers?
Yeah, it's the classic question, isn't it, about global or local? I think there's a couple of ways to answer this. The first one is to use a specific market as an example. About 4 weeks ago, we were out in China releasing the Chinese best brands, and a number of people in the audience asked me why the Chinese brands weren't on the global list, which is a fair question. Because if you look at them from a value perspective, I think the number one brand on the best China brand league table would definitely be valuable enough to feature in the top 100. In fact, it would feature in the top 10. And the top 10 of the Chinese brands were valuable enough to fit within our best global brands league. But the issue is about international. So we do deliberately call it global brands for a reason. You're looking at brands which trade in multiple countries around the world, and one of the primary definitions is that at least 30% of your revenues and earnings have to come from outside your home market. And you really do need to play across 3 major continents, so North America, Europe, Asia as a start point. So the issue about that was that quite simply, none of those brands were really operating in multiple markets. And it might sound simple that you're just going to go trotting out and set yourself up around the world, but ironically, those entering China demonstrate the ways that you can get it wrong by going for taking a global offer or what might have operated for you in your home market and then trying to transplant it somewhere else. A number of the grocery companies made a classic error of just trying to replicate a traditional supermarket experience in China, which sounds like a reasonable thing to do. But they made some fundamental errors, like talking about fresh food. Now, in China, fresh food is still alive. So the sheep are running around and the fish are swimming and the chickens are chickening. And but of course, as far as we're concerned in the Western world, fresh food isn't alive. Consequently, the Chinese were like, hang on a minute, this isn't fresh, what are you talking about? And that was enough to put them off the offer, and those companies had to go back to the drawing board and start again and reinvent the way that they took themselves to their consumers. And I suppose the lesson is really simple. Number one, in order to be a global brand, the most complex thing that you have to be able to do is to understand how to operate in different markets. Because it isn't simply a case of picking it up and dropping it. I mean, even companies like McDonald's, KFC, etc., have learnt that in order to be successful in markets like China or even Europe, you have to change the way that you present your product, the way that your environment works, the way that your service works, and the way that you use communication. So I would say the art of building a global brand actually is about understanding the local differences and understanding what you can do and what you can't do. At the heart of it, what your brand stands for and what you mean has to be consistent. And, the luxury brands like, the Hermès, the Burberrys, whatever else of the world, are a classic example of understanding that you have to have a very consistent global view of what you stand for, what your point of differentiation is, what you mean to people, but then to be able to understand how to make it work locally. And that's the trick. That's the difference between being a great national brand and being a great international or global brand. Thank you very much.